That weekend for a picnic, after carefully placing all the materials, especially the barbecue and samovar, in the trunk, we piled into the car and drove 10 kilometers to the visit. As the name suggests, it was a wooded area surrounded by a low wall with the grave of a saint and 2 small rooms for worship. There was water, toilets, and a couple of swings for the children, but the municipality took care of the place once in a while when they thought of it, and it had a religious identity. Although it is located within the borders of the village, which is 5 kilometers away, when we went there, we found the whole place covered with weeds and in need of maintenance. In this natural state, it was actually a place where we would rest our heads. After a while, the food was eaten, and then it was time for tea. Someone asked our retired lecturer for something to talk about. "You've done research for this place too, haven't you, teacher?" Our old friend responded without hesitation. "Yes, when I came to the district 25 years ago, this was one of the first places I visited in the neighborhood. It has not changed much in the intervening time. I think that for a while, as part of the government's policies to integrate the people, interest was shown in such places and incentives were given for their revitalization. Perhaps they wanted different faith groups to be more tolerant of each other around these tombs." "Alevi and Sunni?" the questioner asked, as if digging into the subject. "Of course," said our old friend. "The fact that Alevis have been victimized for centuries cannot be ignored. The person who is buried here is also regarded as one of the religious saints, whom Alevis regard as a leader and attribute myths to him. In this respect, I believe that they have always been successful in protecting their values. Are the Sunni rulers who inscribed on the tombstone of this man that he was a Halveti sheikh from Khorasan so ignorant that they do not know in which century Halvetism came to Anatolia? How can the person who is both a Halveti sheikh and a Khorasan Irani be a person of different centuries? Where is this discussion going? Alevis are not Halveti, neither are Sunnis. But the person buried here is not a Khorasan Irani, as they write on the tombstone, but a Halveti sheikh. It is also reported that his daughter had made a foundation for the village. He did not come from Khorasan, as they say, but from the neighboring district 25 kilometers away. Although his father was a mudaris there, he chose Halvetism, which was the widespread sect of the period he lived in. In fact, the provincial center of the district was one of the centers of the same order throughout the country. Moreover, the central tekka of this order in the city is one of the rare structures that have survived from centuries ago. Our old friend took the subject from sects and lodges to settlements. In your work, sometimes not very clear data can lead you to artistic explanations of the world you visualize in your imagination. It is as if there is a rivalry between the sheikh's hometown and the city to which he belongs. You can liken it to a younger sister's jealousy of her older sister's beauty. The city is actually incomparably beautiful, in the true sense of the word. It is fairy tale-like. It is mesmerizing. It is not known whether the purpose of the geography in which it is located is to protect this indescribable beauty from the evil eye, or to imprison it as if afraid of letting it slip away. But it has tightly embraced its living space with an incomprehensible thought. In a narrow valley divided into 2 by a river, on the banks of which are lined with mansions, water closets, bridges connecting the 2 shores, but which occasionally causes disasters with its floods. What makes the place perfect is everything that those who have lived there have added to this geography. This is what makes this place fairy tale-like and fascinating. For centuries, the owners of this place have adorned their homeland with mosques, madrasas, inns, bridges, tombs, and many other monumental monuments, like pearls strung on a necklace. The story of each of them is endless. Travelers who have come from distant lands and inhaled the air here have engraved this exotic land with thousands of years of history in their memories. You can imagine that our old friend was in a state of mind as if he was speaking from another world when he was telling these things, in an artistic, descriptive, imaginative, and historical style. After a short breathing break, he continued his words where he had left off. "Let's talk about the little brother. Although the settlement at the foot of the mountain, named after the famous nobles of the district with its rich forests, has the rich heritage of our ancestors, it does not have the fantastic visuality of the city it is connected to. The famous names of our history have left architectural monuments that have become deeds, while the traditions and customs that prevail in every aspect of daily life have shaped the identity of the district. The religious and cultural richness of the city is also present here. It is a geography where every sect that people choose according to their hearts finds life. The richness that offers so many right paths inevitably reminds the existence of the devil. I will never forget the words of a student I met one day. He had used the word palace intrigues, which he had used because of the difficulties he had faced while trying to open a business in the city, as a quality attributed to the people of the region. Let us remember that the geographical location of the city has given it strategic importance throughout history, and for a long time it had an identity with its palace, where the sultans were prepared to rule from their childhood. In the Sharia registers, in the student revolts of hundreds of years ago, the ruler's letter to the capital mentioned that the people protected and defended these rebels. It had also been the center of popular movements a few centuries before. To give an idea about the people, a few examples are the lynching of an Italian doctor in the middle of the previous century, who had taken refuge in a church for protection because my Namarim looked at the naked body of the dead. Another significant incident is the case of the Sheikh of the Naqshbandi order, who was reported to the Sultan and exiled to a distant land. The conspiracy against the son of another Naqshbandi sheikh, of whom the sheikh was a disciple, is very interesting. A prostitute who came to the office where he worked caused a scandal whose consequences were foreseeable by shouting loudly in front of everyone that the money he had given her for the affair was a heart. Ironically, this young man, 20 years later when he was a Grand Vizier, built a shrine and a mosque for his father on a high place overlooking the city, which is still visited today. Another incident is when the people, who were enraged by a young man who was attacked a village near the city and set it on fire, destroying everything. Although I am from here, I confess that I had not heard any of what he said. It was obvious that the others were no different from me. One of the founders of the district, as well as the city center, is another of the leading Grand Viziers of the state. The spirit of the past has deeply penetrated the city and the district, and they have shared a closeness that they could call sisters. However, this beauty, with its vague, disturbing quality that you cannot fully define, has a selfish quality that seems to keep you out. On the other hand, I have always wondered, do the people of places with such a rich heritage squander the wealth that has created their ancestors and themselves for generations? Or are they crushed under a weight they cannot bear? There was a short silence. None of us could have guessed where the conversation would lead. Inexplicably, our old friend suddenly took the subject to private. A few years ago, my sister came to visit her sick husband and her sister-in-law. When I went to visit them in the district, I immediately realized that I had not had enough information about her husband's illness. He had contracted a very rare disease that could not be cured and could happen to anyone at any age, and the disease had reached its final stages. He could not speak, could not walk on his own, could not clean the toilet. He tried to participate in conversations with a scrawl that was difficult to read. His mind was completely in his right place. His brain was working flawlessly. As they say, "Hey big guy, were you someone who would fall into such a state?" And then we realized that we had started to wander among the pages of a life story that stretched deep into the past. Almost 50 years ago, when he became our brother-in-law, he was remembered in our minds as a black-haired, medium-height, well-dressed, handsome, and talkative man. He could do anything, he was skilled. He was a life-loving man. He would get along with people right away. He had a strong sense of morality and justice. He would intervene in situations he saw as unjust. We learned over time that he and his older sister and younger sister had spent their childhood in complete poverty. Their father had divorced their mother and married another woman. They grew up in a one-room house with a toilet in the garden. The older sister and the younger sister studied and became teachers. He started working after high school without completing college. He married my sister around this time. They had a child. The older one did not marry. His younger sister married a teacher where he worked, had 2 children, one a girl, and settled in her husband's hometown. Although they were 1,000 kilometers apart, they visited their sister every year. There is no doubt that their family ties were strong. The single sister lived with her mother in the place where she was born and raised, and with her savings, she bought a plot of land and built a house on it. A detached house with a garden, which is almost everyone's dream. Her mother spent the last years of her life in this house that her eldest daughter had built with great effort. I can't imagine how much pain the sister, who always had a serious appearance, must have gone through when she lost her mother. As we gain life experience, we gradually move away from our dreams. She suggested that the siblings build a floor on top of the house, thinking, maybe one day we will come together again. Only my brother-in-law was positive about this. There was a short silence. I thought that most of us experience those nostalgic feelings that deeply feel the longing for the warmth of family. Our old friend continued his analysis of his heroes. I had visited that woman several times because she was in the neighboring district, and I had taken her on trips to the house by car several times. I had taken photos of the siblings together and placed them somewhere in the album. She was trying to hide her fragile and emotional world behind her hard shell. I don't know to what extent she was successful in this. Her seriousness and know-it-all face stood out due to her profession. But when they got together with her brother, they would first act childish and fuss for a while. Then they would immediately clash on a subject to the point of fighting. Neither of them would accept the other's opinion. However, the little sister would stay away from these fights. The love of the older brother and sister for her was the only indisputable common ground that did not turn into a fight. That smart little girl, the hero of fairy tales, she looked quite romantic. When the little girl's husband, who was a teacher, won the mayoral elections with his candidacy from the leading party of the time, it can be said that they moved up a class in their lives. It is not known how successful the man was in his actions. However, he was re-elected in the following term through his party. However, he did not get a third term because he passed away at a relatively early age due to a heart attack. It cannot be said that the education of both children within the family was successful. Undoubtedly, the lack of interest of their mother and father reflected the boundlessness they experienced during adolescence in the formation of their characters. After the death of his father, the male made wrong investments while starting out in life. He got into debt that he could not handle. The foreclosure officers came knocking on the door. They had to take out a significant portion of their wealth. Their mother left home during this difficult period and went to her sister. I saw her there. She was not in a good condition at all. One of the most difficult moments in the sister's life was witnessing her brother's departure. The words, "Sister, I am dying," came from the lips of that little sister who still clearly bore the traces of her beauty. I cannot even imagine how painful this must have been after her mother. I do not think she could forget this pain in time, but her life was now passing within the order she had managed to establish, as she occasionally confessed, as if she was afraid of losing it. Our old friend had visited that woman when she was approaching her 70s, but there was at least some harmony in the monotony of the woman's simple surroundings and the monotony of her monotonous life. That was enough for him. When her brother came to her years later with an incurable disease, she undoubtedly thought that she would not be able to endure the unbearable pain of witnessing the deaths of her mother and sister, and she wished that God would not show her that day. This wish came true. Events developed rapidly. As my brother-in-law's illness progressed, he was taken to the emergency room and taken to intensive care. When his sister also developed an illness, she was in unbearable pain. The doctors at the state hospital who examined her were not willing to perform surgery, which they saw as life-threatening due to her advanced age. The child of her deceased younger sister came like his ear and took her to the private hospital in her hometown. While my brother-in-law was in intensive care, her sister passed away in that private hospital, 1,000 kilometers away. His body was brought by plane. In the same hospital, his brother was in intensive care, and his sister was in the hospital. The funeral prayer was held the next day, and he was buried next to his mother in the district cemetery, in the grave he had bought for himself and his brother. There was no hope for my brother-in-law. He was transferred from intensive care to the palliative ward. This was the ward where patients spent their last days with their relatives. My brother-in-law's throat and stomach were punctured. He was connected to a machine, and a catheter was inserted. Oxygen was sent to his lungs through a plastic tube, and liquid food called formula was sent to his stomach through another tube. The story had turned into a complete tragedy. I cannot imagine the psychological atmosphere in which the listeners were. Our old friend was gradually approaching a result we did not want to predict. The disease had reached its final stage in a short period of a month or two. The death of the sister was kept a secret from my brother-in-law, so that he would not be sad. After her funeral, the two siblings stayed at home for about 10 days. While my sister and I were at the hospital as relatives of the patient, the house was searched down to the smallest needle, with such meticulousness that it would be reminiscent of a police search. Since the deceased sister had tried to keep her wealth in her house instead of in the bank, there was no inheritance left to share with the other heirs. However, in an inexplicable way, before the old woman went to her nephews for treatment, she had given them a lesson that they should pay attention to. She had brought her old shoes from the shoe rack and examined the gold inside. When the nieces were leaving to come back later, they had stopped by the hospital and had slipped in a note that they had taken 4 or 5 pieces of meat from the refrigerator. When they had asked me before how my brother-in-law was, I had simply said, "He can't speak or move. He is aware of everything he sees." They wanted to say goodbye to him too. The girl kissed his hands with a respectful and loving look and began to tell an emotional story about one of the memories that had taken their place in her mind. This memory was a typical memory reflecting the patient's sarcastic nature. With this aspect that reflected his personality throughout his life, he would always find someone to joke around with and entertain people. His brother watched my brother-in-law with dull eyes for a while and then said, "Let's go now." For some unknown reason at that moment, "Once Upon a Time in the West" came to my mind. Why did I remember the bad guy who gives up on killing the crippled man after watching him crawling on the ground in despair for a while? In this Western classic. But I soon figured out the problem. The only thing my brother-in-law and his sister never discussed was their sister. The reason she left her own home to live with her sister and passed away there was because of her children's irresponsible behavior. My brother-in-law had become obsessed with this issue and saw his nephews as, quote, their mother's murderers. However, he had no choice but to keep them out of his life. If he had known about his sister's death, he would have thought that he would be next. A period began when my sister learned how to care for her patient from the nurses. During her hospital days, the nurses were drawn to the fact that she changed the sheets every day and ran back and forth in the hospital corridors to do this. Despite this, they probably thought that this weak and frail woman could not care for the patient at home. On the other hand, the necessary devices for home care were purchased. I don't know if that's why they called this disease the rich man's disease. There were special nurses trained for this job, and their salaries exceeded the salaries of doctors. Finally, on a snowy winter day, my brother-in-law was brought home by the hospital vehicle. They tried not to let his brother's absence be felt. They all said in unison that he was with his nephews. However, when I returned home to stay the night a short while ago, I would be greeted by the joyful and lively voices of the nephews at the house of the dead. They would come back after a while due to religious rituals. During the condolence visits, we had gone upstairs with the nephew to the tenant's house. He monopolized the conversation with his social personality and started talking about his past memories. This memory, which gave clues about his personality from his military life that left an unforgettable mark on the men's lives, was thought-provoking. He was talking about two young people. They had gone on a vacation by car. They had invited the young girl they had met and immediately became friends with to where they were staying. They took the girl to the house where they were staying, with images that gave the illusion that she was being kidnapped when viewed from the outside. The girl had sex with both of them one after another. Then she found a way to get out of the house and went straight to the police station. She filed a complaint that she had been raped. She was sent to the hospital. After the examination, it was understood that what she had said was true. Although the arrested young men said that the girl had consented, the victim's complaint was taken as the basis. The judge on duty had difficulty making a decision. The girl did not seem convincing. Her actions did not inspire confidence. Moreover, her request was interesting. She was willing to marry whichever one. However, all the evidence was against the young men. Their guardians were called. They would try to meet the girl's excessive demands, such as wanting a wedding with drums and zurna. The situation of the two professors' children would damage their professional reputations. She was willing to leave with alimony after the marriage. As he told the story, he added dramatic elements. If the children went to prison, they would be sent to a ward for those who committed sexual crimes. In the end, the girl's wishes came true with a wedding with drums and pipes. Then what crossed my mind was this. Who does he identify himself with in this incident he is telling? The father of the young people? The young people? Or, a short while later, official letters were sent to the addresses of the heirs. This document was a certificate of inheritance. It was a document showing who the legal heirs were and their legal shares of the inheritance. Accordingly, the sister had determined her heirs with a will approved by a notary public years before her death. These people consisted only of a younger sister and brother. The father's children from the other wife were disinherited. Although their shares of the inheritance were smaller, this situation was upsetting for them because they had been in constant contact for years. They didn't want to believe how the deceased sister could do such a thing. But they knew each other. They knew for sure that the little sister who had passed away years ago was behind all this. In their phone conversations, the older one of these sisters would warn my sister, telling her to be careful with the little sister's children, that they were no different than hungry wolves. This woman was also a retired teacher. She had started calling more after my brother-in-law's illness. Sometimes I would overhear their phone conversations that would last for hours. We met at the funeral. I couldn't figure out if her know-it-all nature came from her family or if it was due to her profession. Of course, in our time, everyone knew everything, but this was more evident in the family. I can't forget a remarkable offer that the woman made during her phone consultations for a patient she couldn't see. She was telling my sister to squeeze a few pennies into her palm so that the nurses at the hospital could take better care of her. The story of my desperate sister who applied this idea, which I find completely unbecoming of a retired teacher, during that stressful period, became tragicomic. The nurse who was really doing her job vehemently rejected the money she told her to buy a gift for her son, as if she had been insulted. The cleaning lady who mopped the floors accepted it gratefully, and later asked my sister to help someone else in need. While walking around the hospital corridors in a depressed state, this time he saw a foreign family who did not speak Turkish. He felt sorry for their situation and wanted to approach them and offer some help. This time, the woman's husband strongly opposed this kind-hearted offer of help. Frankly, the offer of the retired teacher who was a know-it-all could not be realized. Later, I also sensed that the woman's son had the trait of making quick decisions on a subject with little knowledge. The middle one was also an interesting person. She had also retired from this family of teachers. I don't remember why she got divorced, but I think she was an initiative woman. She gave paid lessons. She was not only thrifty, but also knew how to preserve the value of her money. She would take on jobs that others would find risky and would not attempt. She had bought and sold several houses. She had a summer house in a famous coastal town. But what made this woman unforgettable to me was her naughty son. This hooligan, who was addicted to drugs, was pressuring her to turn her mother's house into his own name and was threatening her in a frightening way. The woman eventually disappeared in a way that would make her disappear. However, the third child of this family was a cancer patient. He would travel back and forth from his hometown to the big city on a 3-hour train ride to receive treatment. I remember seeing him more often. He had cut his hair really short and was starting to gain weight. He was trying to hold on to life. I was surprised when he used the word snob, which is used in many meanings such as stupid, sluggish, slovenly, unpleasant, tedious, shameless, for his husband, in an environment where acquaintances gathered and men were being criticized for their rudeness, selfishness, and ingratitude. Frankly, he was the one who visited the deceased the most. The insignificant piece he took from her as a keepsake probably reflected his disappointment. There was silence for a while. A complete deathly silence. When my brother-in-law passed away, my sister was alone. For a while, she didn't understand that his eyes, which were fixed on a fixed point, were no longer those of a living person because the machines were working. When she finally realized that this immobility was eternal, she called the hospital. The ambulance arrived. There was nothing more to be done for him. The machines had been turned off. A blanket had been pulled over the dead body. Later, when the people in the Gesselhain saw the wounds on his back that had not healed during his washing, they could not control their gazes. But what really made me think was that his eyes were open. Gasal tried to close them 2 or 3 times. Finally, when he could not succeed, he gave up. The funeral prayer was performed, and he was buried next to his sister in the family cemetery.